Alright, so now we move to the assembly module, and from the drop-down menu we'll go to assembly. And as you see here in the viewport, we have nothing in the viewport because we don't have an assembly yet. And actually, if we check over here the model tree, so under assembly again, if we expand, we see that there is nothing defined inside the assembly. So the first thing that we need to do is to define the instances, which is pretty much this first icon over here, or you can click it as well from the model tree on the left. So if I click on create instance, so instance, pretty much we are trying to create an instance of the parts that we already have modeled. So create an instance from parts, so yes, and then you need to select the part that you want to create an instance from. So you can select any part, or you can select actually multiple parts, all right? But let's do it like just one by one. So I want to create an instance, for instance, from the beam, and here there is another option. So the instance type, it's telling you is it dependent or independent. And dependent means that the meshing will be dependent on the part. And independent means that the meshing will be dependent on the instance. So what does this mean? So let's assume that right now you are going to create multiple instances from this beam. Like your assembly, it includes multiple beams. So in that case, let's say that your assembly at the end, it has like 4 beams, all right? So later on, when you do the meshing, do you want the meshing of the 4 beams to be the same? If that's the case, then you want to make the mesh dependent on the part. So pretty much you mesh the part, and all the 4 instances will be associated with this part, will be dependent on this part. If you want to deal with each one of these instances differently, then you would choose independent. So this means that you can change the meshing of each of these instances accordingly. For our case, we are going to use the mesh based on the part because everything will be associated with that. We don't need to make the instances different. So we are keep this selection which is dependent. So if I click OK, so right now in the assembly I have the beam, and right now you see in the assembly, once the beam is located, you will see that the coordinates, remember the principal coordinates, now they appear, x, y, z. They didn't appear before, but now we've seen them, and they are pretty much located at the center line of the beam cross section. And when we extruded in the z direction like this. So these are the x, y, z coordinates, and that's why I mentioned in the part video that when you draw the section, make sure that the section is centered with respect to the sketch, so that you have everything centered with respect to these principal axes. So now under assembly, if you look under instances, you see beam over here, and the name of the instance by default, it's the name of the part dash and then an integer representing the number of the instance. If I do another instance of the same part, then you are going to get beam-2, beam-3, and so on. So now let's create another instance. So now let's export, get an instance for the column. As you see here, the preview is active. So you see that the column will be located the same location as the beam. It will be located in the same location as the beam. So let's say okay. So now you see the beam is over here, and you see the column is over there, and in the model tree you see it, the instance. So before we bring the rest, let's organize our assembly, because once we bring the bolts and the plate, everything will be located in the same location and it will be a little bit messy. So perhaps the first thing that we want to do, we want to locate or move our instances to get the assembly as we want it to be, like this. So the first thing that we can do is let's rotate the column. So the column we want to rotate to become vertical. So you can do this from these controls on the right, on the left over here. So this one, it says rotate instance. So if I click on this one, then I need to select my instance, which is this column, and then I click done. And then ABAQUS is asking me to select an axis. So we need to define an axis to rotate around. So this axis can be defined by using 2 points. So actually, I want to define the axis. Let's use this center line because it's already at the center line, right? So I can use this point. This is the first point, and this is my second point. And pretty much I defined like a line over here. And then I'm going to rotate the entire column around this line. So what is the angle of rotation? Let's say 90. So if I go back to the 3D, yes, so that seems fine. I can say okay. So right now you have your column and you have now it's vertical, and everything again is centered with respect to the origin. So that's good. This will make it easier later on for doing anything. Let's say that you want to rotate the column because right now you have the holes on the opposite side, and let's say that you want the holes to be on this side, so you can rotate the column again. So you can select the rotation, you can select the column like this, again the instance, you can select done, and then you need to select a vertical axis to rotate the column around. So instead of selecting here, I can use the coordinates. So we can use 0, 0, 0, the origin. And the second point would be, I will just change the Y direction. I will provide another line in the vertical direction. So I want to pretty much rotate the column around an axis here. So the second point, I can put any number like 0, 1, 0. And then the value, I want to rotate it 180 degrees around this vertical axis. Let me see here. So ABAQUS is telling me, is that okay? Yes, that's okay. So I say okay, so that's fine. So now I rotated it like this. Now, since we are at it, let's also move the beam, or perhaps let's export first the plate and add the plate, and then we can add the beam afterward. So let's create an instance. Let's bring the end plate. Okay, so I have my end plate over here. Okay, you see it over here. So again, it's centered as well. So I need to move the end plate. So I don't need to rotate it, I just need to move it. So I can click here on translate instance. I need to click the end plate, done. And then I need to move it. So I need to click on the start point and the end point of the movement. So I actually can grab vertex over here, this point, and then I can move it to the same point over here because the end plate have the same width, I believe, as the column. So that means that, as you see here, so now the movement is correct, and you see over here that the holes are aligned. Okay, there are many other ways, of course, of doing the movement. You can do here in the constraints. You can make sure that the holes are concentric or coaxial, pretty much. You can make sure that faces are direct to each other, right? That they are on the same plane. So there are many constraints and movement options that you can do that can cover everything pretty much. So now let's move the beam. I will click on the move as well. Click translate, I click the beam, I click done, and then I can move the center of the beam. Let me zoom here a little bit to make sure I'm selecting the right. So this is the center of the beam. Oh, sorry, I think I clicked something wrong here. Let me do it again. Translate, this is the beam, done. Let me select the start point. So I want to select the center line. that's the center line of the beam, and then we can bring it, oh, let me show you here 3D, and then we can bring it to the center line of the end plate. That's it. Okay, done. All right, so now we have the column, the end plate, and everything in the same location. That seems fine. By the way, everything looks blue here, so this is not very nice visually. So you can change that. So if you go here to the top left, this is the color dialog, and right now the color is based on the assembly default. If you drop down this menu, you can show different colors based on the parts. So if I click that, now every part is colored based on it, that it has a different name, will have a different color. And then if you want to modify the colors, you can click on this palette, and then you can modify the individual colors if you want something visually, if you want to take photos or something from your model. So now we need to, the next thing, we need to add the bolts. So let's go here. So I will add the bolt. Of course, we need 4 bolts, but I don't need to put the 4 bolts here. We can create one bolt, and then we can create a pattern. Like we can just create one bolt, and then we can make a pattern using this option over here. Or you can create the 4 instances in the same time, and then move each bolt yourself. Okay, so the both options are available. Let's do the easiest one, because perhaps you have more than too many bolts, and of course moving each individual bolt would be a tedious procedure. So let's just import one instance of the bolt, and now let's move the bolt. So move, where is the bolt? The bolt should be somewhere here. Here it is. By the way, if you want to select something, and let's say this something you cannot see it because it's covered by another part, so you can go here. You see here in this toolbar. So this toolbar, there is this one, create display group. So if you click on that, from this dialog, you can select parts or instances. Can select pretty much anything, but let's say that you select part instances, and then you can select, for instance, the column, and you want to say remove. So remove, this means that you are going to remove the column from the viewport, not from the assembly. It's already in the assembly, but this is just for viewing purposes and for selection purposes. So if I click remove, now I don't see the column, I only see the bolt, which is good, which maybe makes it easier to move things. So I can do that, and then I get back to my movement. I select the bolt and I say done. Oh, sorry, I didn't select it. So let me select it again. Done. And then I need to move it. So because we have this partition that we did before, so now it's much easier to do the movement. So perhaps how can we move that? Instead actually of the movement, perhaps because we don't have an equivalent point, so we can do something different. We can do this over here, like hold the left button on your mouse, and then you can click on coaxial, and then you select the cylindrical face on the movable instance. So I can select this cylindrical face, and I want this to be coaxial with the hole. So this face here from this hole. So if I click on that, and then I need to make sure that these 2 arrows are like in the same direction, so the bolt will not flip. And then I can say OK. So now they are coaxial, they are in the same axis. But now I need to translate the bolt. So I just need to move the bolt now. So I click done. And then I just need to move the bolt from this point. Perhaps we could have used this point directly without using the coaxial constraint. But anyway, so we move it like that. Okay, done. So now we have the bolt in location, right? So now we can show the column again. So you can go here again in the manager, or you can actually click on this one that will show everything automatically. So now we have everything in place. The other thing that we need to do this bolt, we have only one instance, so we need 4 of these bolts to be located. So we can use the pattern option, and then we can select the instance. We click done, and this is similar to what we did before when we created the holes. So we need to provide the values, which was like 100 in this direction, but we need to flip it. And in the other direction, if I remember correctly, that was 140, but we need to flip the direction. So here you go. So now we have all of them like this. So I already generated my 4 bolts. So now if you notice here in the model tree, so the first bolt that we got is called bolt-1. If we have imported the instances like 4 times, we could have had bolt 1, bolt 2, bolt 3, bolt 4. But right now, because we had this linear pattern, so that's why they are called like this. So we have like 3 linear pattern instances coming from bolt 1. But we can rename those if we want anyway, if you need that. So now this is done. Right now we are done with the assembly. So we have everything located in the same location. Everything is fine. So that's okay. So now the next step would be to define, based on my model tree, is to define the step. All right. So this will be our next step, to define the step. And then we will need to define the interactions. So pretty much, although we see the beam touching the plate and we see the plate touching the flange of the column with the bolts, but physically in ABAQUS, they are not in contact. So we need to define how these different parts are interacting with each other, okay, physically. So this we are going to discuss in the next videos. But before I go to the next videos, just one thing to note here. You see these yellow planes over here. So these are the datum planes that we defined when we partitioned the bolt. So if we don't want to see those, because they seem to be like just in the way of our assembly, so you can just go to View, let me remember here, and then you need to go to Assembly Display Options, and then you go to Datum, and then you can unselect datum planes or datum axes of anything that you have defined, and then if you click OK, so now they are removed. You can also remove these principal coordinates, the XYZ, but I always like to keep them because this is just good, like in order if you want to refer to any coordinates. All right. Okay, so that's it. This concludes the assembly. So next time, of course, don't forget to save, and also note here that in the message dialog, we are getting all the message feedback when we created and we rotated all these different instances. And right now I clicked Control S and I saved the model. So now it says that it has been saved in the work directory. So next video, we discuss creating the step.